Good day, everyone. My name is Anthony Mills, and I want to welcome you to our webinar today. It's an honor and a pleasure to have each of you here with us. This is a February webinar for Global Innovation Institute, and I am the Executive Director of GINI. As most of you know, GINI is the world's leading professional certification, business accreditation, and membership organization in the field of innovation. We have innovation professionals who are certified all over the world. We have providers all over the world and extensive activity happening globally. So with that, I just want to welcome you here on behalf of Global Innovation Institute to our webinar today. And thank you so much for joining us and being a part of what we're doing in the world. So I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today and tell you a little bit about him before I give him the floor. So today our guest is Mr. Sean Sheppard. Sean is the managing director at U+, the world's leading corporate venture builder. Sean is a globally recognized thought leader with over 20 years experience bringing new products to market, including being a 5-time sales founder with 3 exits. In addition to helping hundreds of startups find product market fit and predictable revenue models, Sean helps global multinationals to identify new applications of their existing technology portfolio, to bring new products to market with profitable business models, and to organize and train self-managing early product stage sales and marketing teams. Sean was named as one of the top sales influencers you should be following on social media. Sean is also an active mentor, advisor, and guest lecturer at global startup accelerators, innovation conferences, and colleges and universities around the world, including at NASDAQ, Y Combinator, 500 Startups, Galvanize, Alchemist, GSV Labs, London Business School, and the Owen School of Business at Vanderbilt University. Sean is now committed to working with countries, companies, entrepreneurs, and those who want to work with them on building startup ecosystems to find product market fit and on developing the next generation of leaders for the innovation economy. Today, Sean will be sharing with us some of the key lessons that he and U+ have learned from launching over 90 different corporate ventures. Before he starts, however, let me mention that GNI has established a very complementary partnership with U+. In particular, GNI can help your organization learn how to drive innovation in a consistent and reliable manner and certify your staff for that, while U+ can help you to actually develop and deliver any number of digital ventures for your organization. So together we can provide everything your organization needs to really turn it into a true innovation powerhouse from start to finish. And so with that said, please join me today in welcoming Sean Sheppard to our webinar. Sean, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks everyone for joining today. I really appreciate it. I want to keep this interactive. I won't talk for very long. If you have questions, go ahead and send them into the chat room, and then we'll address them when appropriate and make this as interactive as we can. I'll start by sharing my screen, and hopefully you guys can validate that you can see it. Yep, all good. Okay, I see a thumbs up there. Thank you. Okay, I'll go ahead and walk you through a little there we go. Okay, so Anthony gave a lovely introduction, but yes, I mean, my background is I'm a 5-time founder. I have 3 exits. I launched 3 venture funds, made close to 150 startup investments, launched a global accelerator program focused on commercializing new innovations, because that's where we saw the biggest failure rate, is not in building products and technology, but in getting adoption in the market. And to me, it's not innovation without adoption. So our focus has been exclusively on that. We're a 12-year-old firm. We've launched close to 100 digital businesses and created north of $1 billion in market value doing that. And I got dragged into corporate innovation quite by accident. I was helping a lot of my startups in my portfolio try and work with big companies. And for those of you who have done this, where you've done outside-in innovation, startup scouting, POC testing, build by partner strategies, you know that it's always a challenge to get entrepreneurs and, let's say, startups and large organizations to work well together. My experience is that a lot of startup founders don't either have the resources and runway or the expertise of working with large organizations. And a lot of large organizations don't have a lot of experience. One of the big questions we always get is what's your experience with this particular industry or with this particular sector or product or market? And my view of it, having worked across most industries and verticals, is that it's not about the product or the market. It's about the stage of taking something someplace new, and having the right stage relevant people to do that. It's a very different set of behaviors and a very different approach when you're testing new ideas in the market versus managing existing ideas. And so to us, it doesn't matter if you're in fintech or banking or retail or financial services or manufacturing or chemicals, automotive, insurance. It doesn't really matter. It's the idea of that you have a user with a problem and you need to identify a use case for how to solve that problem with them that creates the real value you're looking for that you can leverage later for scale. And so that process of identifying that, creating a happy cohort of early customers that will tell the world they're better off with you than without you is the key. And I think large organizations have a distinct advantage over the startup world. While we all see a lot of wonderful disruptive technologies come out of the startup world, I think that the corporates could have, and large organizations generally have the same opportunity to disrupt themselves as well as their industries if they just had the right stage relevant teams to execute on these concepts and ideas, because they have the subject matter expertise, they have the brand, they have the customers, they have the resources, and they have the ecosystem. But what they typically lack are the right teams organized in the right way to actually go execute against these things. Most innovations fail, and I found the same thing in the startup world. 80% of funded startups fail, and most of the reasons they fail have to do with people and markets, not products and technology. And what we found, and this data comes from Nielsen. According to Nielsen, 30,000 roughly products are launched every year into the global market. Less than 5% of those products last more than 3 years in the market. And where I found the primary reason why is the lack of those stage relevant teams that have the right growth mindset to recognize that they don't know what they don't know yet about how and where a market is going to adopt a product or service. They don't have the right skill set if they haven't built startups in the past, either inside of an organization or on their own. They're in for a sweet surprise about how this goes. And they lack a framework for execution that's very transparent, that allows you to ask the right questions in the right order, looking for patterns of behavior and response that are predictable, repeatable, and scalable. That also give the stakeholders the information they need to recognize that progress is measured differently in taking something someplace new than it might be in managing an existing business. For me, it's about four things. Some of this is philosophical and worldview-esque, if you will, but I think it's really important that everyone has the right mindset and same sort of key metrics to run a successful innovation program. The first and most important to me is your job is to find the truth. The truth about where a product or service fits with a market or a user and what to do about it. In fact, in the startup world, over 50% of successful startups pivot at least once, a third pivot at least twice. So be prepared that that initial idea and concept that you bring to the market isn't necessarily what people want, but they might give you enough truth to tell you what they do want, and you might have an opportunity to pivot in that direction. The second is to create a functional learning organization out of the teams of people who are responsible for pursuing that truth to help you accelerate the path to that truth so that you can get there faster and cheaper and hopefully de-risk the idea along the way to identify what we call a proof of market phase, or decide that it's not going to work and you got to go back to the drawing board or try something else. The third is a measurable way to define the outcomes of the business, whether they're social or business related. So whether it's finding profitability and the unit economics associated with that, or it's creating the impact that you're looking for if it's a social venture. But the rules are pretty much the same. Where I see most organizations fail is they don't recognize the importance and power of the role of a commercialization leader who's responsible for finding that business model objective through the course of testing these ideas and products and services in the market. And in that process of finding the truth, creating a functional learning organization that's getting strategic quick wins in the form of learning, which will lead to that revenue or profitability or impact that you're looking for, fundamentally transforms the way these teams work. And that's, we're not big on, I'm very practical about this stuff because I come from the startup world where we have limited time, money, and resources to find our truth. So I'm not big on the idea of culture transformation. I think it's an important thing to do, certainly, but I don't think it's possible in the way that we operate. I think what is possible is to create functional transformation, but through creating these learning teams. And we think that happens as a byproduct. We don't come out of the gate and say, look, you've got to change everything and change how you do your work. We start with very small, quick win approaches that create the momentum that bring all of the right people into it, because everybody wants to be associated with the winning that comes from that learning. We take a portfolio-based approach, and this is really much a, so again, sort of a project-based timeline slide that talks about how we would execute on an idea in a scalable way. We typically start with exploring a problem space and not being wedded to any particular product or idea. Oftentimes, one of the big mistakes we see organizations make is they've got a product in search of a solution, and they're trying to find a way to shoehorn that into the market. And as a result, they're sort of have a biased approach and set of behaviors attached to how they view the problem space or the opportunity. We try to start with a very clean slate that says these problems exist. How might one solve those problems? And it might be with developing your own solution. Sometimes it might be with partnering with an outside organization, or finding other solutions from other products, markets, or industries that could be applied in their instance. And we see a lot of that today with modern technology and how all of us use technology in our personal lives that can be applied to the professional life as well if we just open our eyes and pay attention to it. Based on that, we'll create an opportunity list, and then we'll prioritize those based on the rubric of, and again, a very practical approach from my view. What's the fastest path to traction with the least amount of time, money, and resources required, with a cohort of people who give us the highest chance and opportunity of learning. And that's really important. When we take an idea out to the market, we're not trying to sell it. We're trying to find fit. And that means that we're trying to recruit early partners who share our vision, understand our current reality, and are willing to give us the two things we need the most right now as we start to test a concept in the market or an idea, which is their time and their truth. And that's an individual psychology and mindset. It's not an organizational one. And identifying the right kinds of partners who will provide that is a bit of a science and certainly a bit of an art, but it has to do with how you approach them. Like I always like to say in the startup community, you're just a stranger with a strange offer and going to a strange place and asking other strangers to do strange things with you. And if you understand that, then how you approach people is very different than how you might do it otherwise. And we see that particularly in large organizations, where they'll try to test things with, let's say, mainstream users that don't necessarily share the vision or aren't willing to accept the current reality because it might be too risky. But there are those that want to work with you because they see a strategic reason to do so. And it's usually around maintaining or creating a competitive advantage by working with you. And as a result, they're willing to give you the resources necessary to do that. And you can do that in very, let's say, controlled and quiet ways that don't negatively impact your brand or your relationships with your partners early on. And I recognize the challenges that come with it, getting access to your customers through your sales organizations or your relationship owners that are afraid that you might upset the apple cart by bringing them something different, or you throw this on a sales organization who's incented and compensated for selling existing products and services, and you ask them to introduce new ideas. It hurts existing sales, and it rarely results in excuse me, that cohort of early customers that you need to be successful. So usually within the first 3 months, we've got some sort of a concept in the hands of early customers. And by 6 months, we've got a validated idea or a real proof of market. And at that point, we can then properly tell you there's a there. Here's the market opportunity. Here's the use case. Here's the value proposition. Here's the business model. And here's how we're going to test that with this early set of users. And then here's what they actually want in the forms of features in the product that we can actually build in 3 months or less, excuse me, in the form of an MVP. And in my view, MVP doesn't stand for minimum viable product. It stands for minimum valuable product. What can I put in their hands that creates value quickly and then gets them to a place where we have a case study and referenceability that we can leverage later. And then we repeat that process over and over again with every idea, with agile market and product development teams that work on the various stages of the development process. And then once we actually get real traction, now we're talking about how do we monetize and commercialize this thing at scale, and then how do we intelligently build a business around a unique, let's say, standalone business around it. Do we spin it out? Do we spin it back in? Do we integrate it with their existing operational models? And that process can go over and over again. We've got clients where we're running 6, 8, 10 different innovation sprints at the same time with these agile product and market development teams in place to make that happen. But the idea for us is that if you apply the mindset and skill set and frameworks of the startup community, knowing they have limited time, money, and resources, you can de-risk these ideas inside of 4 months and have a clear scope of what needs to be built or whether or not it should be killed. The approach that let's just say the new venture development process as we see it is sort of put into 5 different stages. And the way you want to think about how you comprise teams is you want teams that have product expertise, market expertise, design expertise, and tech expertise. What I see so often in large organizations is they'll rely on their internal IT organizations to build these things for them. And that's problematic for a few reasons. Number one, the IT organization was not typically put in place in a large organization to build new businesses. It's there to support existing businesses and try and drive efficiencies in known parts of the business. And as a result, you have challenges and misalignments with trying to leverage them to build these things. As a result, it tends to be slow because they've got a strong backlog of different things that they've got to do for different parts of the organization. They oftentimes don't have digital product managers who fill the gap between the business requirements and the development team's needs that behave, let's say, in this accountable ownership transitional. I'm losing the word here. Translational layer is what I'm looking to say. People that are really good at communicating and liaising between the market and the engineers. The other big thing they miss are these commercialization leaders who need to own the business model outcomes. And who you use at every stage is different because you have different needs. So for example, at the ideation stage, we rely on market and product folks to define the problem space and what you might want to put into the market. in the validation phase, we go heavy on the market folks. We even bring in design so that we can design concepts and put clickable prototypes, for example, or screens in front of users and actually start letting them play with it so you really know what's going on. And then we incorporate more product folks into the testing phase so that at the end of the 3 months, you've got a strong idea here. And typically for us, it's anywhere between a team of between 5 and 10 people total, but it starts with 5 and you get into to 10 by market testing. And then out of there, you've got a scope of what really needs to be built. And that's when we put in place agile product teams and development teams to support the ongoing build and the functional requirements that we've gotten from the market itself. And then the market team comes back in when it's ready to scale and is focused on new user acquisition, learning, getting the feedback, building case studies, creating all the assets necessary to scale a given idea. The first 3 boxes for us are very, let's say, standardized. And the reason is because we can control the majority of the outcomes there. Because we're responsible for prioritizing ideas in collaboration with an organization. We're responsible for going out and validating and testing. And we'll work with the organization to find those early users to do that. And then the initial build is typically around 3 months, depending on the size and scope of what we learn from the market, although that can adjust based on what we learn. But typically our goal is to get something in people's hands in less than 100 days. And then at that point, continuing to grow it and iterate on it and find product market fit becomes the focus at the scale stage. The way I think large organizations effectively work is they have a very transparent framework. They need a safe space. I think this is super critical. They need accountable leaders that give them that safe space and access to the resources to be able to move quickly. Certainly, I'm a big believer in to go fast, you go alone, but to go far, you go together. And there is a transition period at scale where you do start to go more together. But in the beginning, you want to be able to work outside the organization as much as you can and just draw from those resources where you can and need to. Oftentimes, we'll test and validate ideas without the, let's say, in a very confidential stealth mode that doesn't even involve using the customer's brand or customers. Other times we will. It just depends on where we see the fastest opportunity to learn and where we're getting the most positive response from the organization and from their ecosystem. We ask for accountable leaders to give us access to the resources that we need. Whether those are end customers, ecosystem resources, subject matter experts, other members of the team that will take ownership of this and make sure that we get what we need to do our work, and then we stay actively connected in real time in live connected workspaces. And we advocate for daily scrum meetings, or stand-ups as we call them, for the tactical teams that are responsible for moving the ball down the court. The weekly reviews are all about collecting the insights and making changes based on what we learn. You're not going to get different outcomes if you're just persistent without insights. You need to be persistent with insights and focus on making adjustments as quickly as you can. We'll do design sprints where we're iterating almost every other day on products. And then we strongly advocate for what we call a monthly steering committee meeting, where you put together a steering committee of the appropriate stakeholders inside the organization that you need to get your resources and runway from and support. And using the framework, show them the progress of what we're learning and hopefully get them into the right mindset that we want to be learn-it-alls at this stage, not know-it-alls. This is how we typically advocate to structure an innovation team for a particular idea. And we think this is really important because we don't see this kind of structure very often. We see fragmented teams. What I always see, and one of the stories I like to tell is, we go out and we hire the McKinseys or the Bains to to build us a bunch of slides and tell us what to do for the next 3 years. I call them PowerPoint engineers. And then they turn around with that deck and they look for people inside the organization who are willing to, let's say, take the individual risk to work with them. But they haven't really thought through how to organize the teams correctly. So they'll bring people from IT, and they'll bring people from marketing, they'll bring people from sales, and they'll bring people from their product development groups, and subject matter experts and business leaders, let's say P&L owners, et cetera. And they'll try and cobble that together to execute on something. And they typically don't have it organized correctly with the right roles and responsibilities, and they don't necessarily have people held accountable to it or incented for it. So for us, the big role is that commercialization leader. This is that, let's call it non-technical co-founder, which is the role I always served in my own startups. You know, I like to make the joke, I can't even spell HTML. But I know what technology can do to make the world a better place and solve real unique problems for individuals and for businesses at large. And so I know how to communicate well with the product and tech teams and design teams, and advocate on behalf of the market for what should be built in what order and what should be prioritized to really find problem solution fit, and then work with the team to find product market fit. You need a product leader, as I said, a digital product manager that knows how to manage the tech and design teams and turn what the customer's requiring or requesting into real usable products and services that deliver a delightful experience. You need analyst resources to understand what the opportunities look like inside that market, and if what we're working on is scalable. You need that Scrum Master to manage the daily activities of the development team. UX is critical. UX is more than just UI. They conduct customer user interviews. They know how to design the customer journeys and the user stories to create that Amazon-like experience that we all want today. And then you need that CEO, lead, you know, business owner, project owner inside the organization who can act as the buffer and the access point to all the resources you need inside of an organization. And that's typically how we would structure it. If a partner of ours says, look, we've already got, you know, a great tech team, or we've got a great UX person, or we've got the analysts, great. We'll fill in around it, but we'll work together as a fully embedded collaborative team. What you want to be is like this non-dilutive co-founder in a startup, and that's the idea. You need digitally native skill sets on the team with what I call a startup DNA. In our organization, we don't hire people that haven't worked in the startup world, because once you've done it, you understand what's required. You have to wear a lot of hats. You have to embrace ambiguity. You have to communicate cross-functionally across a lot of different teams. You need to know how to deal with customers, as well as the different people across the different parts of the organization. But they need to have, you need to have a team that's comprised of product skills, tech skills, design, and market skills. I've got a couple of case studies in here, which I can speak to later if people like, and I'm going to share this deck out, but this is a good example of what we did at Bridgestone to help them start to build an enterprise software business for a physical company, world's largest tire and rubber maker, had never launched digital products and services. We helped them find product market fit for their very first digital effort, and then design an organization and fund it to start building digital products and services for their partners, their dealers, their end customers, their consumers, as well as their internal teams. And so these are a couple of examples of those efforts. And we run somewhere between 5 to 6 different projects concurrently with agile teams inside of Bridgestone to help them transform their business. I'd say the thing I'm most proud of there is that the very first product we launched for them was called IntelliTire, which was a way to track tire pressure on a vehicle as it was moving. And it created so much data and insights that it reduced the cost to maintain vehicles and tires. It reduced failure rates, and most importantly, it transformed their business model where they can now charge for tires as a service as opposed to just as a commodity. And the CEO got up at a customer forum and said, we now believe the information that's being created from our tires is more valuable than the tires themselves. And so we've been working with them for more than 5 years and have built a very successful mobility solutions group focused exclusively on digital and technology-based solutions to traditional logistics problems. And so in summary, I'll close this up and then I'll open it up for discussion, which is, to me, these are sort of the 4 most important things that you can take away from today as you're thinking about how to execute on innovation inside of a large org. Stage relevant teams are the absolute most critical piece, in my view. Sometimes I'm as bold as to say that if you haven't built a startup, what are you doing in the innovation game? Because it's a very different set of behaviors. You need stage relevant teams. Most organizations have awesome, super smart people that are really good at operating businesses, but they're not great at bringing new ideas to market. Most Fortune 500s, for example, I mean, the entrepreneurs that started those companies are dead or retired. So we're dealing with a very different sort of mindset and incentive structure where mistakes are viewed as a negative, and people, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people start with a lot of vim and vigor and enthusiasm and excitement about some idea that they want to bring to market because they've seen their customers beg them for it. And then they get involved in this and they get stuck in the bureaucratic morass. And before you know it, they stop managing the innovation, they start managing their career, and they back into the bushes like Homer Simpson and they pretend like it never happened. And they move on. And that in my view, needs to change. So I think you need, a separate lab environment or corporate venture building effort with stage relevant teams that have a safe space to be able to build, measure, learn what works and what doesn't, with the resources to be able to do that effectively. And it's really easy to align budget and resources based on the number of ideas that you want to test. You need fully aligned and accountable stakeholders that you're managing up well through the form of a transparent execution framework, and you need them to continue to communicate this innovation story to the right folks and educate them on how to measure this effectively. And then once you've done this once on a project basis and you've had success, it's very scalable. We advocate for a portfolio-based approach and a fast follower strategy. And what do I mean by that? Portfolio-based approach means you have a portfolio of ideas or intellectual property, and you can run them through this innovation cycle with agile market and development teams, market and product development teams, with the stage gates that I laid out, and do as many of these as you like, and depending on how aggressive you want to be. And then the fast follower strategy is look to where the money and the users are going, and provide to them what they're becoming used to. So for example, we all have mobile phones, we all use Amazon and Apple and the like, and we all have these consumer expectations of a digital experience today. Are we providing those as an enterprise to our business users and to our customers? Because they will use you in a professional way the same way they're using it in a personal way. In fact, today, many of them expect it, and there's a big gap there. And so you have the ability, again, with the resources, the customers, the ecosystem, the subject matter experts, to fast follow what's working in a market, and build your own version of an Uber, for example, or build your own version of an Amazon, for example, just to use a couple of ones we all know. But what you lack in order to do that successfully and quickly are these stage relevant teams. And I think that's the most important thing, whether you hire them inside or you go out and you get them from a partner. And that's it for me. I'll go ahead and open it up for questions and chat. And I hope this was informative, and I hope people learned a few things today.
Thank you so much, Sean. Very much appreciated. Let's open it up to questions and answers now. And I have a number of questions, but I'll obviously start with the audiences. So Brian posted a question, going back to one of your earlier slides that mentioned the 95% failure rate. What's the source of the data you have?
Yeah, that in corporate innovation, that comes from Nielsen. I mean, they've been putting out reports on that every few years for a while now. In the startup world, CB Insights has great data on failure rates. And it's mostly, they're quite similar. And that's what I've seen in my experience. In short, we live in the age of applied technology. It's never been easier or cheaper to get products built and into market. And as a result, it's never been more difficult or expensive to get real traction for those in the market. And it's primarily because of markets and people, not products and technology. The first time I raised money from a startup for myself with my team, we raised money from Guy Kawasaki and Garage Ventures over 25 years ago. Raised $8.5 million on an idea just to get an MVP in the market. I could build that same product today for probably less than $500,000 because most of the infrastructure exists. Most of what we're doing is front-end workflow application stuff, things with data. Certainly there are developed technologies and deep science that creates patentable products with clear barriers to entry. But there's less of that. Most of the venture money is going into, and most of the future investment is going into applied technology.
Brian also wanted to know if you had a write-up of the Bridgestone IntelliTire case study that you would be.
Yes, yeah, it's absolutely, and I'll get that sent out. It's on our website.
Okay.
We've got close to 70 case studies on the website.
Right.
I'll certainly be able to get the one that I shared plus the IntelliTire one out to you guys after the session.
Yeah, and you can, G&I, when we distribute the recording, everything, we'll distribute that through us and so forth.
Right.
Now I had a couple of questions, Sean. When you work with your client organizations, what percentage of them do you find have these stage relevant teams already set up in these isolated groups?
Almost none. I mean, they will have what they call a lab. They will have a venture studio. They will have an incubation center. They will have an innovation team. They will have an emerging technology group. And that's great. Very few of them have experienced startup entrepreneurs. And they don't often have the teams organized correctly with the right people and the right roles and the right skill set. And so we try to, let's say, show them by doing, how to properly structure and organize and execute. And then they learn from that. And they'll either continue to work with us or they'll start to build their own capability, which is great. We're happy either way.
So when you're doing that first project, I mean, are you using their staff to fill out this team, or are you using the U+ staff to fill out this team?
It's a combination of the two.
Okay.
But typically, for us, if you want it to happen quick and you want it to happen right, you give us the accountable leader and we'll take care of the rest.
Okay. So the key point person from the organization is that leader, that commercialization leader. And the rest can come from either their office or yours, but obviously your office has to be very involved in driving the process.
Yeah, we provide the commercialization leader because oftentimes most organizations don't even know that's a thing.
Okay.
They'll have a business unit leader. They'll have a business, a line of business owner. They'll have a tech leader. They'll have somebody. We've worked with CMOs, CIOs, CTOs, VPs of sales, president. We've worked with senior people that own a business unit or a function, product folks. It's very much all over the board because it always kind of comes down to who has the courage and the vision to execute on something, because they're not really structured in a way. They have their R&D groups certainly, but if they see an opportunity to transform their business and or create a competitive advantage for themselves by doing something differently, and they've got the power and the influence to do it, they're a perfect partner.
Okay. Now another question coming from our audience is basically this: is how does this process map onto other physical products like in the CPG space, or is it only useful for digital innovation?
So I love that question. And I kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning, right? It's not about the product or the market. It's about the stage of taking something someplace new, whether it's hardware, software, CPG, services, some blend of those things. And even the business model, whether it's B2B or B2C or marketplaces or B2B2C, because it's an H to H experience. It's all about human to human interaction, taking unstructured data from spending time with users to really understand deeply what they want and then how to get it to them. And that's a skill set that comes from commercialization, product, design. It's not a technology function. It's more about creating and understanding those experiences. And it works in CPG just as well as it works in any of these other markets. How quickly you can scale it and what the expectation is, whether it's a physical good versus a digital one, is different, certainly. And that's something you deal with at the scale stage. It's not something you deal with early on.
Yeah, can I build on that?
Sure.
Yeah. So I used to be at Mars for 12 and a half years, and they do pet food and rice, but
Yeah.
mostly known for M&Ms and chocolate. And our sales team was told, go out and sell more. And we did seasonal M&Ms, and the seasonal M&Ms are in little packs where it's like, oh, it's a red and green blend or whatever. And they were able to get a deal going with a national, one of the big QSRs, fast food. And the factory did not want to do the bulk cases. You can't have the M&Ms ground up for a shake doing one little bag at a time. You need to do a bulk case. So I was led with like how to get it done in the company in the right format. And the factory people were like, time out, get out, not wanting to talk to me. And I talked to somebody from BCG and they said, we'll find out how they're measured. Because the sales guys are like, this is going to be an $8 million sale.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out the factory guys, when I went and asked them, they were measured on not disrupting the production line. And,
that's right.
And converting to a bulk case would be a one-day disruption. And they didn't want their bonuses impacted. It's like, but you can be responsible for increase in sales. They weren't measured on sales. So
Right.
it's just that whole thing, and we had to get it together, but we finally were able to go to their bosses and say, this is a good thing, and they'll disrupt a line, but they're increasing sales $8 million, so isn't that a win for everybody? So it was really tricky, but that how each group is measured almost disrupted this huge thing, so.
Yeah, that kills a lot of these innovations
Yeah.
because frankly, they're, So why you probably, I would imagine, if you think about the stages we just talked about, I would imagine why you were successful in actually getting that through was because you already found a repeatable, predictable, scalable opportunity with a customer. Right.
And I documented the process to make sure we could repeat it.
Yeah. And so you did all of that before you even engaged these folks in manufacturing or their leaders. Right. And so you had a strong case already in place. And what I see oftentimes is that these people get involved way too early in the innovation cycle. And you don't even know who your customer is yet. You think you know who they are, and you operate on assumptions because you've been running an established business. And I think we all know what happens when we operate on assumptions versus hypotheses and how we behave and how things are different.
Right.
So our entire process is scientific method, and it's all about doing it quickly, quietly, and inexpensively, and getting to a place where you can make that case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great.
Trying to do it outside of those, and trying to do it outside of those misaligned departments and parts of the organization.
Yeah, there's so much stakeholder management that goes into actually scaling, especially when it comes to scaling something,
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Now, Brian had also asked the question, any thoughts on the big global innovation centers that companies have? Are any of them good at this, or none of them?
No, I mean, some of them are good at it. And we work with a lot of those folks, but I see a lot of innovation theater and a lot of hand puppetry, and I see a lot of people. Everybody certainly defines innovation differently, right? Which just tells you how immature and nascent this is as a function in large organizations. Because if you pull 500 innovation people, you're going to get a couple hundred different answers. So that's number one. So there's no real standard. Approach to it. The other thing is broadly, people define innovation as, to me, I view it as there's basically two kinds of innovation. There's your inside out, and then there's your outside in. And a lot of people call it innovation when they're out scouting for startups to help them solve problems, challenges. There's nothing wrong with that, and that works for some. But if you're really, to me, if you're truly, truly, truly serious about innovation, you're going to you're going to adopt a fast follower strategy. You're going to add stage relevant teams with an execution framework, and you're going to resource them accordingly so they can they can test X number of ideas every year. It's a culture of experimentation. Amazon runs 30,000 experiments a month as an organization. Wow. 30,000. And they've always done it that way. And the numbers just scaled because this organization is scaled, but it's always been a culture of experimentation. The most successful startups are a culture of experimentation. So you need to set up your innovation function, your innovation center, whatever, as not a laboratory of testing in a petri dish, but a laboratory of testing in the market, and do it in a repeatable, predictable, scalable way with a process that allows you to take every one of these ideas and either find out whether there's there or you need to kill it. And it's all about de-risking those things. So to me, the faster you can run those experiments, the quicker you're going to land on things that stick.
I wholeheartedly agree, Sean. I mean, this is one of the things we constantly preach to organizations is relentless experimentation. I mean, to me, that's the heart of innovation these days is how do you do fast, inexpensive, quick, really good learning experiments. And the faster and better you can do experiments and learn, the faster you can find the right fit and get the right innovation to market. So
yeah, when I talk to these organizations sometimes and I look at their cycle from an idea and getting it tested and getting it built, they're talking about years.
Yeah, which is silly.
It should take weeks or months. And I watch a million startups do it every day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, they're just running circles around some of the organizations. I wanted to revisit real quick one of your early points that it wasn't entirely clear to me. And it was the part about how you actually recruit. You called them partners, but in effect, they're customers. Yeah. The customers that are going to help you test this concept. And you said you didn't want to necessarily go through our existing sales teams because that's a distraction for them, but I wasn't really clear how you actually got these partners recruited and on board with you. Can you?
Yeah, I mean, the very first step is to change everybody's attitude and get them to buy into the idea of recruiting partners instead of selling to customers. And then teaching them what that means, like I talked about. Understanding you need to find people who share your vision.
Yes.
Understand your reality and are willing to give you the time and truth necessary to go down that path. And then you have to show them what that looks like and give them that journey. Then you have to develop an initial partner profile, a customer profile. We call it an initial customer profile, which is a very different set of characteristics and behaviors than your long-term customer profile. I kind of always go back to Jeffrey Moore's crossing the chasm concepts of early adopters and innovators. I still think it applies very well here. You're looking for people who are willing to take the risk early on. And so so identifying that customer profile in grave detail, setting up a selection criteria, fit criteria that give both parties what they want, and then presenting that to the marketplace makes it very easy for people to raise their hand and go, yeah, that's me. Or raise their hand and go, no, that's not me. Don't bother me. And now you've mitigated your opportunity cost.
But are you working through your existing sales teams, or are you circumventing and going around that sales team?
We're strategically navigating based on what we learn and how that.
So some of both, maybe.
Absolutely, some of both, right? But we set the expectation about what we're trying to do, and then based on, let's say, if people are going to play nice or not, we'll either go. We're not going to go through them, but we will go around them, right, or go with them.
Okay. So it's kind of like there's various flavors of with and around, and it kind of depends on how nicely they play with you.
Because I also think it's really important to do this stuff, like I said, quietly. Right.
Right. But I would think some existing sales teams would get upset that you're creating problems amongst their clients, and you're
but again, we're not doing this. We're not doing this at scale. We're doing a statistically significant cohort. So we're talking about anywhere from 3 to 5 to maybe, a couple of dozen engagements.
Right.
And then we're going to recruit the sales people that share that vision with us. And then we're going to work with them.
So hopefully you can find some people in the existing sales team that will share that vision with you.
Yes. Innovators and early adopters represent about 20% of the market. So there's 1 in 5, we're going to find them.
On the sales team. And then you want to use that person to help you find some partners out there to help you really.
Yeah, well, that 1 in 5 statistic is a human behavioral statistic. It's not a role specific statistic.
Okay.
1 in 5 people are willing to play in that innovator early adopter space. So we will find them one way or the other. We always do. And then we deliver a message to them that's very honest about here's what this is going to look like. Right?
I just wonder if in that sales team, even if you find that person, sometimes maybe the people they report to aren't on board with this, and there gets to be some political struggles.
Yeah, there are always those challenges, but we can also just go entirely outside the organization and test with non-customers, and we do that all the time too. And we want to do that because the most honest truth you get is from strangers.
So a lot of the testings with non-current customers. I see.
Yeah.
Brian asked the question, and it may need a little more clarification, but his question is, how hard is it to kill innovations politically? And I guess what he means is, once you started something, people kind of get like, they fall in love with the idea, and if it doesn't test out, now we need to kill it. Does that become a political landmine in the process?
Yeah, sometimes, but I don't want this to sound cynical, but I've seen innovation killing done a lot more. Let's say I use the example of Homer Simpson backing into the bushes. People are very adept at quietly killing things, without taking responsibility for them.
Well, maybe that's one of the reasons for doing this all quietly in the first place too, so that when you kill it, that's done quietly.
You don't want to negatively impact the people or the brand in the process of doing this, so we're very careful. Plus, you don't need all the user research in the world, and all the data will show you that you need less people than you think to find patterns. And so there are statistically significant, let's say, tiers of cohort sizes based on business models and products and markets that will tell you, look, you're going to reach a law of diminishing returns at some point with this user. You don't need to go past that to know what the what the response is going to be. And so, again, every industry is different, but usually it's somewhere in a couple of roughly in the B2B world, you don't need more than 24 of these conversations and deep user interviews to really understand what's going on.
I see. Okay, very good. So we probably have time for one more question or so. So there was a question here. In your opinion, what is the perfect innovation ecosystem, and what are the critical success factors for that?
Oh, I love this. So I used to do a keynote on this before COVID all the time around the world, and I love it, on how to build a successful ecosystem. So you need founders and funders, educators, governments, and customers all fully aligned, and you need a business model. So, for example, what I built with GrowthX and GrowthX Academy was a very successful privatized ecosystem. So we created a fund structure that allowed us to invest capital, not just in the companies, but in people to help them find product market fit. We created a school that created a tuition model that allowed us to fund this at scale and train the community at the same time and give free resources to the startup ecosystem. We involved the governments for tuition reimbursement and job creation metrics that aligned with them. And then we brought in the corporates that thought that they wanted to participate in the innovation ecosystem by being customers, acquirers, or investors. And it took about 10 years to figure it out, but it worked. And I think it's very repeatable.
Yeah.
But you have to bring all those parties together. But there was a framework for that.
Yeah, well, yes, and you're right. That it probably did take about 10 years to get all those stakeholders to really integrate in that process. But
as a corporate, you already have an ecosystem. You just don't know how to tap into it yet.
Great point.
Everything you need is there. And so aligning and structuring your innovation effort to fully tap into the ecosystem is another big gap I see. And we do it in a very similar way.
Well, excellent. Well, those are outstanding insights, and I see a lot of comments here. Just thank you so much for this session. Great session. Thanks a lot. Amazing session. Great insights. And so on behalf of our entire audience, Sean, I just want to thank you so much for sharing these great insights with us, and your incredible experience with startups and new business ventures, and outstanding. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Anybody who wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, go ahead and send me a note. And I know that Anthony and the team will get this content out to you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We will. We'll follow up with the recordings and this content. And as I mentioned, GNI has a partnership with U+, so you can also learn more about that on the GNI website. Let us know what questions you have. So with that, I'll say thank you, everyone, and wish you a wonderful, great day. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Take care.